Next up, we're going to talk about Colorado. So I thought, well, I've talked about, a team in Detroit that people seem to think might be the worst. So I'm going to talk about a team that's a Stanley Cup contender, favorite even, in the Colorado Avalanche. And this is where the rubber really meets the road. So for Joe Sakic, he's turned this team around over the last few years. They had 95 points in 2017-2018, had 90 in 2018-2019, and then were prorated out to 108 over 82 games this past season, 2019-2020. So all the stats would tell you Colorado's getting better, and everybody's predicting them to win the Cup. I'm predicting them to win the Cup. Hockey News has them predicted to win the Cup. Sports Forecaster has them predicted to win the Cup. So the pressure's on now. This is where Sakic's team shows whether or not he really got it 100% right, or if there's still some work to be done. When you look at the exits from this team, well, they've actually had a pretty decent number of players leave. Some of them were rentals. So Zadorov is gone via trade. Nemesnikov was a rental. Nieto's gone. Wilson's gone. Barbario, Connaughton, and Hutchinson, who came in as a rental, and it turned out to be a pretty smart rental because they ended up needing him in the playoffs, and they very nearly took out the Dallas Stars with Hutchinson in net. And if that had happened, if they had won that Game 7 over Dallas, I'd still be hearing about it. So, yeah, Hutchinson did pretty well and ends up going back to Toronto, but kudos to him for how well he played for Colorado. Now, the power rankings as they are, the Hockey News has them first, and Sports Forecaster has them finishing first in the Central. I actually have them finishing second in the division, and I'm going to say why. Because I know there's going to be Colorado fans going, wait a minute, you're taking to win the Cup and not necessarily win the division? Right. The team that wins the President's Trophy, do they win the Stanley Cup? No. The team that wins the Stanley Cup is usually a team that's right near the top, pretty darn good team, usually top 5 in the NHL, and not necessarily number 1, but still excellent. So I think that I could see Vegas ending up ahead of them in the regular season, and then in the playoffs, we'll see. I think the playoffs are going to be very, very interesting for the Avs. That's where it's going to really be decided whether or not this team is better or not. Now, what's interesting too for me with Colorado, looking through players and looking for guys who didn't score enough, guys who were too low in their scoring. Jost is the only one I can think of, but I've been talking about Jost for years and saying, okay, so this kid's it's going to happen, right? He's going to eventually start to realize at least some level of the scoring that was expected. 67 games last season, 8 goals, 15 assists, 23 points. There's flashes here and there. Have him on the board because he's the only one I can look at and go, yep, probably underachieved. I thought about Nichushkin, but Nichushkin performed much better than was expected. And everybody else, I mean, Landeskog was down a bit, I think, points per game from the year before, but not enough for me to say, oh, this huge bounce back for Landy. I think Jost is the only one that I can think of. The rookie to watch is going to be Byram. I have Byram as the big ad. I think Bowen Byram, again, coming out of the World Juniors, we'll see how it goes for him. But Byram could be absolutely gangbusters for Colorado on a team that already had a good blue line before Byram gets there. And they've added Taves. They already had a good blue line before Taves. Now, the question mark for me with that blue line is it's still young. It's still inexperienced. So there's still going to be mistakes made by that young blue line. Now, when you look at their goals for last year, they were 4th overall at 3.37. Their goals against, 2.71 or 6th. So defensively, they were solid. Their goaltending was pretty good, too. Their goaltending underrated. Power play, surprisingly low at 19.09%, which was 19th in the National Hockey League. Their penalty kill, kind of middle of the pack, too. 81.43% for 13th. You combine those numbers, you end up with 100.5, which tells you they're right around the middle, which is odd because they should be better than that. But when you look at the amount of injuries Colorado went through last year, you can understand if that would have affected their special teams. So their core 6, pretty obvious up front. It's going to be Landeskog, McKinnon, Rantanen. Yeah, Landeskog's a little bit older, but that line of 3, they're together. They stay together. I can't see them being broken up, and that's despite the reality there are some other good young players coming up. On the blue line, I have Makar and Girard as the 2 young defensemen who I think are going to lead this team, although Byram maybe ends up being that guy. And then in net, Grubauer. Grubauer is 29 years of age. I don't know that he's long-term going to be there. And they've got a Noonan coming up who may very well be that dreaded terminology of goalie of the future, but he may be that for Colorado. And we'll see how things turn out for Colorado. It is the one part of this team that I do wonder, like, okay, do they have that young goaltender who can come in for when Francouz or Grubauer moves on or gets moved? Do they have that guy who can step in? So a Noonan may be the guy that long-term ends up stepping into that spot. Coach, Jared Bednar, he is pretty safe. Bednar's done an excellent job. And again, you look at Colorado's record, and then you look at their injured list. And there were points last year where they had, 8, 9 guys out? Like, they had a lot of players out last year. And key guys, too. It's not like they were scrubs or call-ups that were getting hurt. It was a lot of core guys. The fact that they hung in there and their record stayed pretty solid is nothing short of remarkable. And for me, that's one of the reasons why I think Bednar is underrated as a coach. Joe Sakic, best GM in the league. There's the argument to be made that, yes, he is the best general manager in the league. And for Sakic, a guy who goes back far enough with the Colorado organization that he wore a legit Quebec Nordiques jersey as a Nordique. He's been with this organization for so long, and he seems to understand what he's doing. And despite, 3 years ago, it looked like, well, they can't trade Duchesne, and this is just a mess, and Colorado's terrible. And now 3 years later, he's proven everybody wrong. Very wrong. I am very happily wrong about the Avs, their direction, and their GM from where I felt they were a few years ago. Glass half full. It's pretty simple. This is your cup favorite. Tampa Bay will get its share of attention as a potential back-to-back winner. I would think that a shortened season might make it easier for Tampa as well. And I say easier because it's a 31-team league. This is going to be a very difficult season. And the playoffs, no matter what division you're in, it's going to be tough to get through 2 rounds of divisional playoffs. And whoever wins those divisional playoffs, you're going to have some pretty good competition there. So they're a cup favorite. If you're glass half empty, the one concern you may have about Colorado is that they're overhyped. So we always get teams, and I was going to do videos at some point. Maybe that waits till next off season. But I was going to do videos at some point on teams that were really hyped up as here's the next big thing, and then they didn't make it. So a team that looks like on paper everything's going to be great, and then the following season they have their struggles, or maybe they don't make it in the playoffs. And so that's the one concern you might have if you're an Avs fan right now is there's so much hype and everybody's bought in and everybody loves the Avs. These guys are going to win a Stanley Cup. Are they overhyped? Are there too many people that have jumped on that bandwagon? Is it too full? And that is, if you're going to be dealing with a glass half empty scenario, that's one of the better scenarios. There are plenty of fan bases that would love to have that as a scenario of, are we just too good? So yeah, that's where we're at. Next big hype, I went with Justin Barron. Justin Barron's next big hype. There's not going to be a roster spot available to him over the next year or so, but he doesn't project to threaten for a job anyways over the next year or so. Could end up being a really decent draft pick as well. Sakic's proven to be very, very solid when it comes to his drafting, and this team is kind of sort of fantastic. And when you look at their record every month of the season, they were good. There wasn't really a huge downbeat. They were 8-2-2 in October, 8-6 in November, 7-5-2 in December, 5-2-2 in January, 11-3-1 in February, which is insane, and 3-2-1 in March. Keep in mind, there were long stretches there where they had all kinds of injury problems. They still stayed above 500 throughout that. This is a very solid team. What's interesting too, though, for all the praise and all this, what's interesting is when you look at the record against teams that are in their projected division. Anaheim 1-1-1. That's a surprisingly mediocre record. Arizona, they were 1-1. LA, they were 1-2. They lost 2 out of 3 against LA, including the outdoor game. Minnesota, they were 2-2 against Minnesota. Against San Jose, they were 2-0. Against St. Louis, they were 2-2. Against Vegas, they were 2-0. So in their own division, they were 11-8-1. They handled Vegas, struggled against LA, did well against San Jose, had their issues with Anaheim. So this is a team that there's no reason to think they won't be a Stanley Cup contender. There's no reason to think that we won't see them potentially raising a Stanley Cup in July. But it's going to be interesting to see how they play against their own division. Because an 11-8-1 record against their own division would tell you some of these teams they may have issues with. And it'll be interesting to see how well they play and whether or not they're able to rise to the occasion. Because again, the pressure's on. The pressure's on for Colorado. And these jerseys will be worn 4 times this year. And we'll see what their record's like for them. And whether or not that'll decide whether or not teams keep some of these retros or they don't. If your record's really bad with the retros, odds are they get retired. If you're undefeated with the retros, odds are you keep them. But we'll see. So there you go. So the big question I have for people watching this is, are the Avalanche overhyped right now? Or are they legit? Is this a legit team that's going to end up being a potential Stanley Cup favorite? And maybe run through and win themselves a Stanley Cup over this shortened season? Or what do you think's going to happen? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.